Hi, this is the History of Israel podcast, an Each My Own Beat podcast. Over the coming weeks, months, and years, we'll be discussing the history of Israel. This is not a podcast to say which side is right, which side is wrong. It's not a podcast to talk about the war which is happening in Palestine. It's just simply the history of Israel.
Picture this. The year is 628 AD, and two superpowers have just finished beating each other senseless in what historians call the last great war of antiquity. The Byzantine and Sasanian empires are exhausted, their treasuries empty, their armies decimated. And lurking in the Arabian Peninsula is a new force that's about to change everything. Today, we're diving into the Byzantine alliance and invasion of Egypt. Specifically, how a decades-long war between ancient superpowers accidentally opened the door for Islamic conquest, why Egypt became the ultimate prize that everyone fought over, and what this teaches us about how empires really fall. By the end of this episode, you'll understand how alliances can backfire spectacularly, and why sometimes winning a war can be the worst thing that happens to you. So let me throw this at you right away. We're not actually talking about Byzantines invading Egypt. We're talking about something way more complex and frankly more interesting.
Exactly. The page content shows us this is really about three separate but connected invasions of Egypt. First, the Sasanian Persians conquered Egypt from the Byzantines starting in 618 or 619. Then, the Byzantines reconquered it around 629. And finally, the Arabs took it from the Byzantines between 639 and 642.
Wait, so Egypt changed hands 3 times in about 25 years?
That's right. And each conquest set up the next one. According to the sources, the Byzantine-Sasanian War of 602 to 628 was called the last great war of antiquity, and it was fought between the Byzantine Empire and the Sasanian Empire.
Okay, but why Egypt specifically? What made it so valuable that everyone wanted it?
Egypt was one of the empire's most economically and strategically important provinces, according to the page content. It had been under Roman rule since 30 BC. We're talking about 7 centuries of Roman and then Byzantine control. It was a massive source of wealth and grain.
So let's start with this Byzantine-Persian War. What kicked it off?
It started with an assassination. In 602, the Byzantine emperor Maurice was murdered by his political rival Phocas. The Sasanian king Khosrow II declared war, ostensibly to avenge Maurice's death. But here's the thing. Maurice had actually helped Khosrow regain his throne in 591.
So this was personal?
Partly, but it was also opportunistic. The sources tell us this became a decades-long conflict, the longest war in the Roman-Persian series, and it was fought throughout the Middle East, the Aegean Sea, and even before the walls of Constantinople itself.
And the Persians were winning initially?
Absolutely crushing it. From 602 to 622, the Sasanians gradually conquered much of the Levant, parts of Anatolia, and for the first time ever, Egypt and several islands in the Aegean Sea. They took Jerusalem in 614 and Alexandria in 619.
For the first time ever? So Persia had never controlled Egypt before?
That's what makes this so significant. According to the Encyclopedia Iranica, the occupation of Egypt beginning in 619 or 618 was one of the triumphs in the last Sasanian war against Byzantium. This was unprecedented.
Now, I'm curious about the actual invasion. Do we know how it happened?
We have some fascinating details from Greek papyrus documents. They show that Nomos Arsinoites was occupied sometime after July 21, 618, and Nomos Oxyrhynchites sometime between July 5, 619 and January 12, 620. The conquest of Alexandria happened in June 619.
That's incredibly specific dating for something that happened 1,400 years ago.
Right? And we even have Middle Persian papyrus documents that survived, written in Persian script using the Zoroastrian calendar. One papyrus lists Persian military stations. It's like finding ancient administrative records in a completely foreign system.
That's wild. So what was it like for ordinary Egyptians living under Persian rule?
The sources give us some heartbreaking glimpses. There's a Greek papyrus where a father who fled to Arsinoe in the Fayum wrote to his master, complaining that the Persians had abducted him from his home, tortured him into unconsciousness, and then robbed him of his children.
Jesus. That's not just conquest, that's devastation of families.
But here's what's interesting. According to scholar Clive Foss, the Persian occupation had long-term consequences because it resulted in an unconscious loosening of ties with the former Byzantine rulers. The administrative machinery functioned well under foreign masters.
So the Persians were actually good administrators?
They relied heavily on the structures of the Byzantine state already in place. After the initial military operations, they quickly turned to administration. And this is crucial. Foss concluded that the Sasanians prepared the way for the success of the Arab campaign 2 decades later.
Wait, so by conquering Egypt, the Persians accidentally made it easier for the Arabs to conquer it later?
Exactly. It showed that the region could function under non-Byzantine rule. But let's talk about what happened next, the Byzantine counterattack.
Right, because the Byzantines did get Egypt back, didn't they?
They did. The new Byzantine emperor Heraclius launched counterattacks from 622 to 626 that eventually forced the Persians onto the defensive. The war ended with the fall of Khosrow on February 25, 628, and his son concluded a peace treaty returning conquered territories to the Eastern Roman Empire.
So the Byzantines won?
Technically, yes. But here's the thing. According to the sources, by the end of the war, both sides had exhausted their human and material resources. The casualty figures show 200,000 plus dead on each side.
200,000 each? That's like wiping out entire armies multiple times over.
And that exhaustion made them vulnerable to the emergence of the Islamic Rashidun Caliphate in the 630s. The page content is very clear. Both empires were sitting ducks.
So this is where the Arabs come in?
Exactly. The Arab conquest of Egypt was led by Amr ibn al-As of the Rashidun Caliphate against the Byzantine Empire between 639 and 642 AD. It ended the Roman period in Egypt, which had lasted for approximately 7 centuries.
7 centuries. That's longer than the United States has existed.
And it more broadly concluded the Greco-Roman period of Egyptian history, which had endured for nearly a millennium. But here's what's crucial. Prior to the Arab conquest, Byzantine rule in Egypt had undergone significant political and military disruption from that Persian occupation.
So the Byzantines were still recovering from the Persian War when the Arabs attacked?
Absolutely. And by the mid-630s, the Byzantine Empire had also lost control of the Levant and its Ghassanid Federate allies in Arabia following defeats by the Rashidun Caliphate. They were getting hit from multiple directions.
This sounds like a classic case of imperial overstretch meeting perfect timing by their enemies.
That's exactly right. And the loss of Egypt further reduced imperial military and fiscal capacity, contributing to additional territorial contraction in the Eastern Mediterranean in the centuries that followed.
So losing Egypt wasn't just losing one province, it was losing the economic foundation for defending everything else?
Precisely. And this kicked off what became the Arab-Byzantine Wars, a series of wars from the 7th to 11th centuries between successive Islamic caliphates and the Byzantine Empire.
Wait, so this wasn't just one conquest, this started centuries of warfare?
The sources show that following the Byzantine defeat at the Battle of Yarmouk, Muslim armies conquered most Byzantine territory in the Levant, Egypt, and North Africa within decades. Syria was captured in 639, Egypt in 642.
That's incredibly fast. What made the Arab armies so effective?
Well, they were facing exhausted enemies. But also, according to the World History Encyclopedia, Islam arose as both a religious and socio-political force. Within a few decades, the empire expanded from Medina to engulf all of Arabia, Iraq, Syria, Levant, Iran, Egypt, parts of North Africa, and several Mediterranean islands.
That's like going from controlling one city to controlling half the known world in a generation.
And here's something fascinating. You mentioned earlier how this rivalry went way back. The conflict between Byzantines and Sasanians was actually a continuation of a rivalry that began in the 1st century BC. In 54 BC, Marcus Licinius Crassus launched a campaign against the Parthians and suffered a devastating defeat at Carrhae.
So this was like an ancient Cold War that had been going on for centuries?
Exactly. According to Plutarch, 43,000 soldiers participated in Crassus's campaign, with an estimated 20,000 killed and 10,000 captured. It was considered the Roman Republic's worst defeat since the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC.
And that defeat actually changed Roman politics, didn't it?
It did. Crassus's death upset the balance of power in Rome, leading to civil war between Pompey and Caesar. Caesar won but was assassinated in 44 BC, sparking more civil wars until Octavian emerged victorious and became the first Roman emperor.
So a defeat in the Middle East literally led to the fall of the Roman Republic?
It was a major factor. And now, 6 centuries later, we're seeing the same pattern. Exhaustion from fighting in the Middle East, making empires vulnerable to new threats.
That's a sobering parallel. So what happened to the Byzantines after they lost Egypt?
They adapted. According to ancient origins, if Byzantium was to survive, it had to reevaluate its situation and devise a new strategy. They created homegrown defensive units based in newly organized administrative and military provinces, the theme system.
So they basically had to reinvent themselves?
Completely. The new defensive system focused on Anatolian topography and a new defensive style of warfare. During the initial period of conflict, the Byzantines were usually on the defensive, avoiding open battles and preferring to retreat to fortified strongholds.
That's such a different strategy from the old Roman approach of aggressive expansion.
Right. And it worked. The sources show that Arab expansion slowed after 2 failed sieges of Constantinople in the late 7th and early 8th centuries. By the mid-9th century, the Byzantines had partially recovered and recaptured some territory in Anatolia.
So they survived by becoming smaller but more defensible?
Exactly. But the broader point is how these conflicts reshaped the entire Mediterranean world. The page content notes that this was the first encounter between Islamic and Christian people, and the aftermath set the stage for the Islamic conquest of North Africa, the Crusades, and many other historical conflicts.
So we're really talking about the moment when the medieval world began?
In many ways, yes. The Arab conquest ended not just Roman rule in Egypt, but the entire Greco-Roman period of Egyptian history. According to Britannica, Egypt cast off the heritage of the past to embrace a new language and a new religion. In other words, a new culture.
And all of this started because 2 exhausted empires couldn't defend what they'd fought so hard to control.
That's the tragic irony. The Byzantine-Sasanian War was called the last great war of antiquity, but it was really the war that ended antiquity by making both empires vulnerable to something completely new.
So, when you step back from all this, what's the bigger lesson here? We've got these ancient superpowers fighting over Egypt, exhausting themselves, and then getting blindsided by a completely different threat they never saw coming.
I think it shows how winning can be just as dangerous as losing. The Byzantines technically won their war with Persia, but the cost was so high that they couldn't defend against the next threat. It's a classic case of imperial overstretch meeting perfect timing by emerging powers.
And Egypt was the perfect example of this, right? It changed hands 3 times in 25 years because each conqueror was weaker than the last.
Exactly. The Persian occupation loosened Byzantine ties, the Byzantine reconquest was expensive and temporary, and the Arab conquest was permanent because they were facing an exhausted enemy. Each invasion set up the next one.
What strikes me is how this completely reshaped not just Egypt, but the entire Mediterranean world. We went from a Greco-Roman civilization that had lasted nearly a millennium to something entirely new.
And it happened so fast. Within decades, Muslim armies had conquered the Levant, Mesopotamia, Persia, the Caucasus, Egypt, North Africa, and even parts of Spain and France. The speed was unprecedented.
So here's what this really comes down to. Sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones that make headlines, but the ones that exhaust the winners. The last great war of antiquity wasn't great because of who won, but because it ended an entire era by weakening everyone involved. Next time you hear about ancient alliances or modern superpowers fighting proxy wars, remember Egypt in the 7th century. Sometimes winning the war means losing everything that comes after.
This has been the History of Israel podcast. Check back every Wednesday for new episodes. We're available on Apple, iTunes, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. We also have each episode streaming on YouTube. Like, subscribe, comment, and share. We're available on eattomyownbeat.com as well as the History of Israel podcast on Facebook.